Callaway Enterprises will be transferring to Julian soon. The words hung in the air like an executioner's axe. I looked up from my seared salmon to find Vanessa's eyes fixed on me with clinical detachment. Her voice carried the rehearsed quality of a corporate announcement, as though she weren't discussing the theft of my life's work but merely commenting on the weather. Her father, Montgomery Callaway, seated at the head of the mahogany table that had witnessed countless family dinners and business deals, merely nodded with quiet satisfaction. The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across his face, highlighting the triumphant gleam in his eyes. Beside Vanessa sat Julian Crawford, tall, Harvard-educated, the son of Montgomery's oldest friend, wearing the smug expression of a man who believed he had already won. For 11 grueling years, I had transformed Callaway Enterprises from a floundering regional business into a $55 million empire. Weekends sacrificed at the altar of ambition, family vacations abandoned for emergency board meetings, sleep surrendered to late-night negotiations with international partners. This wasn't just a company, it was my masterpiece. Every failed division I had revitalized, every impossible contract I had secured, every strategic acquisition that had elevated Montgomery's name to the upper echelons of the business world. Blood thundered in my ears, but my expression remained carved from marble. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of witnessing my devastation. Instead, I surveyed the other faces around the table, Montgomery's siblings chatting about their summer homes, his executive friends nodding along to whatever trivial topic had followed the bombshell announcement, his wife asking Vanessa about her upcoming charity gala, as though nothing momentous had occurred. Were they all complicit, or merely blind to the significance of what had transpired? Or perhaps they knew but had chosen silence, unwilling to challenge the patriarch's proclamation. That's how it had always been in the Callaway dynasty, Montgomery decreed, and everyone fell in line like disciplined soldiers. I turned my attention to Vanessa. 11 years of marriage, and I realized in that moment that she had never once taken my side against her father's decisions. She had always been his daughter first, my wife second, a beautiful, polished chess piece in Montgomery's grand game of dynasty building. And now, I had been deemed expendable, not because I had failed, not because I lacked vision or ability, but because I was no longer necessary to their dynastic plans. What do you think about the Barcelona acquisition, Nathaniel? Montgomery's voice cut through my thoughts, casual, as if he hadn't just announced my professional execution. I set my fork down with deliberate care, the silver making barely a sound against fine china. I think, I said, meeting his gaze directly, we should discuss this further in private. Montgomery waved his hand dismissively. No need for privacy among family. Julian has some excellent ideas about European expansion. I'm sure he does, I replied, my voice a study in controlled neutrality. Vanessa placed her hand on Julian's arm, the diamond on her finger catching the light. The platinum band I had given her on our wedding day was conspicuously absent. How long, I wondered, had this coup been in planning? How many nights had she lain beside me, already plotting my replacement? The room hummed with conversation and laughter, crystal glasses clinking in celebration of God knows what, while my world had collapsed into silence. I had built their empire brick by brick, and they believed they could simply hand the keys to another man while I quietly slipped away into obscurity. They had gravely underestimated me. Sleep evaded me that night. While Vanessa slumbered peacefully in our bed, our marriage bed, I sat in my study, the dim light of a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. Surrounding me was the physical evidence of my life's work, financial reports bearing my signature, contracts I had negotiated, strategic plans I had crafted and executed. For 11 years, I had operated with meticulous precision. While Montgomery presented himself as the respectable tycoon and Vanessa luxuriated in the wealth my efforts generated, I had been making moves, subtle, calculated, undeniably strategic. I had observed how power fluctuated within the Callaway dynasty, how allegiance was perpetually conditional. I had learned that the only person worthy of my trust was myself. So I had ensured that my control over the company wasn't merely symbolic. It was legal, binding, and absolute. The blue light of my laptop illuminated my face as my fingers glided across the keyboard, accessing documents that Montgomery believed were safely buried in corporate archives. The executive shareholders agreement appeared on screen, the numbers confirming what I already knew, 58%. That was my ownership stake in Callaway Enterprises, not Montgomery's 22%. Not Vanessa's 15%. Certainly not Julian's non-existent share, mine. I leaned back in my leather chair, a cold smile playing at the corners of my mouth. They thought they had cornered me, but they had no concept of the fortress I had constructed around myself. They expected me to disappear with dignified resignation. Instead, I was about to demonstrate exactly who they were dealing with. The Callaway headquarters dominated the city skyline, 60 stories of steel and glass that reflected the morning sun like a monument to ambition. I arrived as dawn broke, the early hour ensuring the lobby was nearly deserted except for security personnel and cleaning staff. By 7 a.m., I was ensconced in my office on the top floor, reviewing my strategy. My assistant Rebecca entered without knocking, her efficiency one of the many reasons I had poached her from a competitor years ago. Dark-haired and sharp-eyed, she had been my right hand for 8 years, intuitive, discreet, and fiercely loyal. "You're early," she observed, setting a cup of black coffee on my desk. "Schedule a board meeting for noon," I instructed, ignoring her comment. She hesitated fractionally, her gaze flickering to my face. "The rumor mill is working overtime. Something about Julian Crawford taking over operations. Is that what they're saying?" "Among other things." She studied me carefully. "Montgomery called twice already, said it's urgent." "I'm sure it is." I opened my laptop. "Call legal. I want them standing by for the board meeting." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Should I prepare the quarterly financial reports as well?" "And the executive audit from last month, the complete version." She nodded once and turned to leave. "Rebecca," I called after her, "after today there will be changes, significant ones." "I assumed as much." A slight smile curved her lips. "I've updated my resume just in case." "That won't be necessary." By 9 a.m., the office had come alive with the usual Monday morning bustle. Whispers followed me as I moved through the executive floor, fragments of speculation trailing in my wake. "Did you hear what happened? Is he stepping down?" "Crawford's already cleared his schedule for the transition." I ignored them all, closing my office door on the murmurs. At precisely 9:30, my phone buzzed. Rebecca's voice came through the intercom. "Montgomery Callaway, Vanessa, and Julian Crawford are here to see you. Send them in." The door opened without a courtesy knock. Montgomery entered first, his commanding presence filling the room despite his average height. At 63, he remained formidable. Silver-haired, immaculately dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his face weathered but unwrinkled thanks to discreet cosmetic procedures. Vanessa followed, the picture of polished elegance in a cream silk blouse and pencil skirt, her dark hair swept into a professional chignon. Not a hint of the previous night's betrayal showed in her perfect composure. Julian trailed behind them, younger than me by perhaps 5 years, tall and broad-shouldered in a blue suit that screamed old money. His confidence radiated like expensive cologne, the assurance of a man who had never truly failed because there had always been someone to catch him when he stumbled. "What the hell is this about a board meeting?" Montgomery demanded without preamble, approaching my desk with the entitled stride of a man accustomed to unquestioned authority. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "Good morning to you too, Montgomery." "Don't play games, Nathaniel. We agreed on the transition timeline. Julian starts shadowing you next week, full handover by the end of the quarter." "Did we agree?" I raised an eyebrow. "I don't recall being consulted." "This isn't productive," Vanessa interjected, her voice smooth with practiced mediation. "We're all on the same team." A quiet laugh escaped me. "Are we? Interesting perspective, considering last night's announcement." Julian stepped forward, hands in his pockets, casual in his presumed victory. "Look, I understand this is difficult. Transitions always are. But I assure you we'll maintain the core vision you've helped establish." I studied him for a moment, this man who believed he could simply step into my shoes. "Julian, let me offer some advice. When you're speaking to the person who built the company you're trying to steal, perhaps skip the condescension." His expression hardened. "No one's stealing anything. This is a natural progression for a family business." "Is it?" I reached for the remote on my desk and activated the wall-mounted display. The executive shareholders agreement appeared, key sections highlighted in yellow. "Perhaps you should all refresh your understanding of Callaway's ownership structure." They turned to the screen, confusion giving way to dawning comprehension as they processed the numbers. Montgomery stepped closer, his face flushing with anger. "This can't be right. Where did you get these figures?" "From the company records, the same ones you signed off on after the Peterson Group acquisition 3 years ago." I stood, buttoning my suit jacket. Any transfer of leadership requires approval from the majority shareholder. I paused, allowing the implication to sink in. That would be me. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in our professional relationship, Montgomery's mask of composure cracked, revealing the fury beneath. "This is impossible," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "No," I corrected, my voice cutting through the tension. "What's impossible is thinking I would devote 11 years to building something only to let you steal it from me." I turned to Vanessa, whose perfect composure had finally slipped, her fingers curled into tight fists at her sides. "Did you really believe I wouldn't see this coming?" She didn't answer, but her eyes, so like her father's, flashed with something between shock and calculation. "This isn't over," Montgomery warned, his voice low with promised retribution. "You're right," I agreed. "It's just beginning." I shifted my attention to Julian, who had retreated a step, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning fog. "You have two choices. You can work under my direction as a regular employee, starting at the bottom like everyone else, or you can walk out that door and never set foot in this building again." His face flushed crimson, jaw working as though chewing on a particularly bitter retort. He looked to Vanessa, then to Montgomery, seeking guidance or perhaps permission to explode. Finding neither, he turned and stormed out without another word. Montgomery hesitated, clearly torn between following his protege and continuing the confrontation. "You've made a serious mistake, Nathaniel, one you'll regret." "No, Montgomery, you made the mistake when you forgot who actually built this company." I gestured toward the door. "I have a board meeting to prepare for." He turned and left, his steps measured but his shoulders rigid with fury. Vanessa lingered, her gaze locked with mine. She was searching for something, a crack in my resolve perhaps, a sign that I might yet be manipulated. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice softer but no less sharp. "That's a fascinating question coming from you," I replied. "Why am I protecting what's mine? Why am I refusing to be discarded like an obsolete piece of equipment? What possible motivation could I have?" "You're being dramatic. This was always the plan, for a member of the Calloway family to eventually take the reins." "And I'm not family? 11 years of marriage, and I'm still an outsider to be replaced when convenient?" She had the grace to look away momentarily. "That's not what I meant." "Then explain what you did mean when you sat smiling at dinner while your father handed my company to another man." "My father's company," she corrected automatically. "Look at the screen, Vanessa. Look at the numbers. It hasn't been your father's company for years. He was just too arrogant to notice the ground shifting beneath his feet." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This doesn't have to become a war." A dry, humorless laugh escaped me. "It already is." She studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You've changed." "No, I've simply stopped pretending to be the man you all thought I was." I moved toward the door, opening it in a clear dismissal. "The board meets at noon. You're welcome to attend, though I suggest you prepare yourself for significant changes." After she left, I stood at the window overlooking the city, the empire I had built spreading out below me. The morning sun glinted off distant skyscrapers, a reminder that beyond these walls the world continued turning, indifferent to the personal dramas unfolding within. Rebecca entered without knocking. "Legal's ready. The board has been notified, though half of them are already calling for details. Let them wonder." "Montgomery is on the phone with Gregory Peterson. Sounds like he's rallying the old guard." Peterson was the senior-most board member, a contemporary of Montgomery's who had been with the company since its early days. He controlled a 3% stake and held considerable influence with the other board members. "Expected." I turned from the window. "Is the audit report ready?" She handed me a thick folder. "Everything's here. Financial irregularities going back 5 years, all with Montgomery's signature or explicit approval." I flipped through the pages, scanning the highlighted sections. Hidden losses, mismanaged funds, embezzlement disguised as business expenses. Montgomery's financial sleight of hand, meticulously documented. "He never expected anyone to look closely," Rebecca observed. "A common failing among men who believe themselves untouchable." I closed the folder. "Let's go into Dynasty." The boardroom occupied the entire west side of the top floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. The 20-foot table was already surrounded by executives and board members when I arrived, their conversations falling to hushed whispers as I entered. Montgomery sat at the far end, his usual position, with Gregory Peterson to his right, and 3 other senior executives clustered nearby, his inner circle, the old guard who had benefited most from his leadership. Vanessa sat beside an empty chair clearly meant for Julian, who was noticeably absent. I took my place at the head of the table, Rebecca setting the audit folder and other documents before me. The room quieted completely as I surveyed the assembled faces, some anxious, others carefully neutral, all waiting to see which way the wind would blow before committing themselves. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I began, my voice carrying easily in the silent room. "I've called this emergency meeting to address some rumors that have been circulating and to clarify the leadership structure of Callaway Enterprises moving forward." Montgomery leaned forward, his hands clasped before him on the table. "Before we begin, I'd like to make an announcement." "By all means," I gestured for him to continue, curious to see his countermove. "After careful consideration and discussion with the executive team, I've decided it's time for new leadership at Callaway. Julian Crawford will be assuming the role of CEO, effective immediately, with Nathaniel transitioning to an advisory position." Murmurs rippled through the room. Several board members exchanged glances, clearly hearing this for the first time. "That's an interesting proposal," I said when the whispers quieted. "Unfortunately, it directly contradicts company bylaws." Rebecca distributed copies of the shareholders' agreement to everyone present, the same document I had displayed earlier in my office. "As you can see, any leadership change requires majority shareholder approval." I paused, allowing them time to scan the highlighted sections. "I control 58% of Callaway Enterprises. This transition cannot and will not occur without my consent, which I am not giving." Gregory Peterson adjusted his glasses, frowning at the document. "When did this happen?" "The last financial report showed Montgomery with controlling interest." "The restructuring occurred during the Peterson Group acquisition 3 years ago," I explained. "The details were included in the financial statements approved by this board." "This is a technicality," Montgomery interjected, his voice tight with controlled anger. "A paperwork error that can be rectified." "Is it an error when the documents bear your signature?" I countered, sliding another set of papers toward Peterson. "These are the original contracts with your explicit approval of the ownership transfer." Peterson studied the documents, his frown deepening. "These appear legitimate, Montgomery." Montgomery's jaw tightened visibly. "This is a family business. It stays in the family." "I couldn't agree more," I replied smoothly. "As Vanessa's husband of 11 years, I am family. Or at least I was until last night when you announced my replacement at dinner with all the ceremony of changing the menu." Several board members shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Montgomery and me. "This isn't personal," Montgomery insisted, addressing the room rather than me. "This is about the future of Callaway Enterprises. We need fresh leadership, new perspectives." "If that's truly your concern," I said, opening the audit folder, "perhaps we should discuss your financial management over the past 5 years." I nodded to Rebecca, who distributed another set of documents. "These are the results of an internal audit conducted last month. I suggest you pay particular attention to pages 12 through 17, which detail approximately $14 million channeled into offshore accounts under Montgomery's personal control." The reaction was immediate. The room erupted in murmurs, executives leafing rapidly through the pages, expressions ranging from shock to calculation. "This is slander," Montgomery snapped, his face flushing dark red. "A fabricated attack." "Every transaction is documented," I interrupted calmly. "Every transfer bears your authorization code. Every account has been verified by our financial team." Gregory Peterson cleared his throat, looking genuinely disturbed. "Montgomery, is this accurate?" Montgomery hesitated, his eyes darting around the table, assessing his allies. "These are complex financial structures designed to minimize tax exposure, completely legal." "Tax evasion is a federal crime," I pointed out, as is embezzlement. "This is a private matter," Montgomery insisted, his voice dropping dangerously, "one that can be handled discreetly." "No," I countered firmly. "This is a corporate matter that affects every person in this room, every shareholder, every employee. As the majority owner, I have a responsibility to protect this company from corruption, even when that corruption comes from its founder." The silence that followed was deafening. The balance of power had shifted palpably, the momentum now firmly in my favor. "What are you proposing?" Peterson asked finally, his loyalty to Montgomery clearly wavering in the face of potential legal complications. "2 things," I replied. "First, Montgomery's immediate resignation from all positions within Callaway Enterprises. Second, the transfer of his remaining shares to company control. "This is extortion," Montgomery hissed. "This is consequences," I corrected. "You tried to push me out. Instead, you gave me everything I need to remove you permanently." The board meeting lasted another hour, but the outcome was never in doubt. By the time we adjourned, Montgomery had been removed as chairman, his executive privileges revoked, his access to company accounts terminated. The board voted unanimously to accept his resignation for health reasons, a final courtesy to the man who had founded the company 30 years earlier. He left without speaking to anyone, his face set in stone, Vanessa following close behind. I watched them go, feeling neither triumph nor regret, only a cold certainty that I had done what was necessary. "Congratulations, Mr. Chairman," Rebecca said quietly as the boardroom emptied. I nodded, gathering the documents before me. "Schedule a company-wide announcement for tomorrow morning and have security clear out Montgomery's office. I want his personal effects delivered to his home by the end of day." "And Vanessa?" I hesitated, the question hitting a nerve I thought I'd numbed. "Her access remains for now, but monitor her activities." The war had been won, but experience had taught me that defeated enemies rarely stayed defeated for long. The following days passed in a blur of meetings, announcements, and strategic realignments. The business press caught wind of the leadership change, and headlines blared across financial news outlets. "Coup at Callaway, founder ousted in boardroom showdown. Rising star Nathaniel Barrett takes control of Callaway empire. Corporate power shift sends stocks soaring." The last was particularly satisfying. Callaway Enterprises' share price had jumped 12% since the announcement, the market apparently approving of the new leadership. I moved my office into the chairman's suite, a corner space with panoramic views that had been Montgomery's domain for decades. I kept his desk, a massive mahogany piece that had witnessed countless deals, but replaced everything else, erasing his presence from the space as thoroughly as he had tried to erase me from the company. Vanessa hadn't returned to our home since the board meeting. According to Rebecca's discreet inquiries, she was staying at her father's estate in Meridian Heights, a sprawling property that had been in the Callaway family for generations. She had called several times, but I had instructed my assistant to take messages. Whatever Vanessa wanted to say, I wasn't ready to hear it. A week after the board meeting, as I was leaving the office late, I found her waiting in the lobby. She stood near the security desk, elegant even in her obvious discomfort, drawing glances from the few employees still trickling out at the end of the day. I could have walked past her, instructed security to escort her out. Something in her expression, a vulnerability I rarely saw, made me stop. "You've been avoiding me," she said quietly. "I've been busy running the company your father tried to steal from me," I replied. She glanced around at the curious onlookers. "Can we talk somewhere private?" I considered refusing, then nodded toward the side exit that led to the executive parking garage. She followed me silently through the door and into the cool evening air, the space deserted except for a few luxury vehicles. "You've destroyed him," she said when we were alone, her voice tight with accusation. 30 years building Callaway, and you took it all in a day." "He destroyed himself," I corrected. "I just made sure everyone saw it." She crossed her arms, whether against the evening chill or my coldness, I couldn't tell. "He's not well. The doctor says his blood pressure—" "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't use his health to manipulate me. He made his choice when he decided I was disposable." "And what about me? Was I just collateral damage in your revenge?" I studied her face, searching for the woman I had believed in for 11 years. "You were never collateral, Vanessa. You were an active participant. You sat there while he announced my replacement, and you smiled." She looked away, unable to hold my gaze. "I made a mistake." "You made a choice," I corrected, "and it was the wrong one." "I didn't know how to stop him," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "He's always been overwhelming when he decides something." "So you allowed him to decide I was expendable. After 11 years of marriage, I wasn't worth fighting for." Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. "You're so quick to judge. Do you have any idea what it's like being Montgomery Callaway's daughter? The expectations, the pressure, everything I've ever done has been measured against his standards. And you've never had the courage to defy those standards," I said, "even when it cost you your marriage." She flinched as though I'd struck her. "Is that what this is? You're punishing me?" "No, Vanessa, I'm simply done pretending, done playing the role of the grateful son-in-law, done being underestimated and taken for granted." "So where does that leave us?" she asked, a tremor in her voice betraying the emotion beneath her composed exterior. I considered the question, truly considered it. Despite everything, there had been good years between us, moments of genuine connection. But the foundation had been built on shifting sand, and now the tide had washed it away. There is no us anymore, I said finally. You chose your side, I've chosen mine. Just like that? 11 years erased? Ask your father how it feels, I suggested. He's the expert at erasing people when they're no longer useful. Her eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. Always in control, always the perfect Calloway daughter. I still love you, she whispered. The words should have moved me, should have cracked the ice that had formed around my heart. Instead, they rang hollow, a last desperate attempt to maintain some influence over me. No, you don't, I replied gently. You love the idea of me, the ambitious young executive your father molded, the man who helped build the Calloway legacy. But that man doesn't exist anymore. He never really did. I turned to leave, then paused, looking back at her one last time. The divorce papers will be delivered tomorrow. I've been more than fair with the settlement. Take it and start over somewhere new, Vanessa, somewhere beyond your father's shadow. I walked away without waiting for her response, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the concrete garage. It felt like walking away from a different life, a different version of myself. The man who had married Vanessa Calloway 11 years ago, eager to please, desperate to belong, was gone. In his place stood someone harder, colder, but unquestionably stronger. The months that followed brought rapid change to Calloway Enterprises. I restructured the executive team, promoting talent from within and bringing in fresh perspectives from outside. The old guard, Montgomery's loyalists, were either reassigned or offered generous early retirement packages. The board was expanded to include more independent voices, diluting the influence of the remaining Calloway allies. Under my leadership, the company pursued aggressive expansion into European and Asian markets, securing partnerships that Montgomery had been too conservative to pursue. Our stock price continued to climb, validating my vision in the language Wall Street understood best: profit. 3 months after taking control, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something, intuition perhaps, made me answer. Nathaniel Barrett. You think you've won? Montgomery's voice, once so commanding, now sounded tired and bitter. This isn't about winning, I replied, though we both knew that was a lie. You took everything from me, he continued, as though I hadn't spoken. My company, my reputation, even my daughter. You tried to take everything from me first, I reminded him. The difference is, you failed. A heavy silence filled the line, broken only by his labored breathing. I want to meet. I should have refused. There was nothing left to say, nothing he could offer that would interest me. Yet curiosity, or perhaps some lingering need for closure, made me agree. My office, tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Not your office, he countered immediately. Neutral ground. This isn't a negotiation, Montgomery. My office or not at all. Another long pause. Fine. 10 o'clock. The following morning when he arrived, I hardly recognized him. Just 3 months had aged him a decade. His shoulders, once squared with perpetual confidence, now slumped slightly. The tailored suit hung a bit loose, as though he'd lost weight. But it was his eyes that showed the most change, the arrogance replaced by something that looked unsettlingly like defeat. You wanted to see me, I said, not bothering to rise from behind my desk, his former desk. He glanced around the redesigned office, taking in the changes, the modern furniture that had replaced the traditional pieces, the abstract art where family photos once hung, the distinct absence of anything Calloway. You've made your point, he said finally, lowering himself into the chair opposite my desk. Have I? You've taken everything, destroyed what I spent decades building, turned my own daughter against me. Congratulations. I studied him, searching for the manipulative intent behind his apparent surrender. Montgomery Calloway didn't admit defeat. He regrouped and counterattacked. What do you want, Montgomery? I'm assuming this isn't a social call. He sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. I want one thing, a seat at the table. I laughed, genuinely surprised by his audacity. You had a seat, the head of the table, in fact. You lost it when you tried to replace me with Julian Crawford. I built Calloway from nothing, he insisted, leaning forward with a flash of his old intensity. 30 years of my life, my vision. You can't just erase that history. History is written by the victors, I reminded him, and in this case, that's me. His jaw tightened visibly. At least let me buy back in. A small stake. enough to retain some connection to the company that bears my name. I considered his request, turning it over in my mind like an interesting but ultimately worthless trinket. There is no price, Montgomery. No amount of money that would persuade me to let you back into Callaway Enterprises in any capacity. You're shutting me out completely, he said, disbelief coloring his tone. You shut yourself out, I corrected. You made a choice. Now you're living with the consequences. He stood abruptly, the motion lacking his usual fluid grace. You think you're different from me, superior somehow, but you're not. You're exactly like me, Nathaniel. That's why you succeeded where others failed. That's why you were able to take my company. There's one critical difference between us, I said, rising to meet his gaze. I would never betray someone who had given everything to build my success. You'll end up just like me, he warned, his voice low and intense. Surrounded by people who fear you but don't love you. Respected but not trusted. Rich beyond measure and utterly alone. I smiled thinly. I'm already alone, Montgomery. You and Vanessa ensured that when you plotted to replace me. The difference is, now I'm alone by choice, not by betrayal. He held my gaze for a long moment, searching for something. Weakness, perhaps, or doubt. Finding neither, he turned and walked to the door. One last thing, he said, pausing with his hand on the doorknob. Vanessa never wanted to hurt you. That was all me. Remember that when you're signing those divorce papers. Before I could respond, he was gone, the door closing quietly behind him. I stood motionless, his words echoing in my mind. Was he telling the truth about Vanessa, or was this a final attempt to drive a wedge between me and my own resolve? With Montgomery, manipulation was as natural as breathing, a trait he had passed to his daughter. I pushed the thought away. It didn't matter now. The die had been cast, the battle won. Callaway Enterprises, no, Barrett Enterprises now as I had renamed it last week, was mine. The future stretched before me, unburdened by the past. 6 months after taking control, I authorized our most ambitious expansion yet, a series of acquisitions across Asia that would increase our market valuation by an estimated 40%. The announcement sent our stock price soaring once again, eliciting admiring profiles in business publications and envious murmurs from competitors. I had reshaped the company in my image, bold, strategic, uncompromising. The Callaway name had been systematically removed from corporate materials, replaced with Barrett branding that emphasized innovation and forward thinking. It was as if Montgomery had never existed, his 3 decades of leadership reduced to a footnote in company history. Late one evening, as I worked alone in my office, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. Have you heard about Montgomery? I hesitated, then replied, Who is this? It's Vanessa. Please call me. It's important. I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. Our divorce had been finalized months ago, the settlement generous enough to make headlines in its own right. There was nothing left between us except memories I preferred not to revisit. Against my better judgment, I called. What's happened? I asked when she answered, dispensing with pleasantries. Her voice sounded strained, as though she'd been crying. He's in the hospital. Stroke. The doctors say. She trailed off, composing herself. They say he might not recover. I should have felt something. Satisfaction, perhaps, or vindication. Instead, I felt a curious emptiness, as though the news concerned a stranger rather than the man who had been my mentor, then my enemy. I'm sorry to hear that, I said finally, the words hollow even to my own ears. He's been asking for you, she continued, surprising me. In his lucid moments, he wants to see you. Why? To offer another lecture about how I'll end up alone? He wants to make peace, Nathaniel, before it's too late. I laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet office. Peace? After everything he did? Everything you both did? People make mistakes, she said softly. Even terrible ones. Isn't there room for forgiveness? Forgiveness requires remorse, I pointed out. Something neither of you has demonstrated. She was silent for a moment. I am remorseful, more than you know. I chose wrong, and I've been paying for it every day since. But this isn't about me. It's about a dying man's last wish. I closed my eyes, suddenly tired beyond measure. What hospital? Meridian Medical Center, room 1042. She hesitated. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I warned. I haven't decided what I'll say to him. After hanging up, I stood at the window overlooking the city, lights twinkling below like earthbound stars. The empire I had built, or stolen, depending on one's perspective, spread before me, testament to my vision and determination. And yet, In that moment, it felt strangely hollow. What was the point of victory if there was no one to share it with? What value was there in power if it left you isolated, distrustful of everyone around you? Montgomery's warning echoed in my mind. Surrounded by people who fear you but don't love you, respected but not trusted, rich beyond measure and utterly alone. Had I become what I despised? In defeating Montgomery, had I transformed into him? I pushed the thought away. This was manipulation, even from a hospital bed. Montgomery was trying to make me doubt myself, to question the justice of what I had done. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. And yet, the next morning found me standing outside room 1042 at Meridian Medical Center, hesitating before I knocked. The man in the hospital bed bore little resemblance to the Montgomery Calloway I had known. Tubes and wires connected him to various machines that beeped and hummed in the sterile room. His skin had a grayish pallor. His hair, always so perfectly styled, lay lank against the pillow. An oxygen tube ran beneath his nose, and his right side appeared slack, the corner of his mouth drooping slightly. Vanessa sat beside the bed, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She looked up as I entered, surprise and something like hope flashing across her face. "You came," she said softly, rising from her chair. "Apparently," I replied, my gaze fixed on Montgomery. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but regular. "He's been drifting in and out," she explained. "The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical." I nodded, unsure what to say. This frail figure in the hospital bed seemed so removed from the Montgomery who had dominated boardrooms and crushed opponents without remorse. "I'll give you some privacy," Vanessa said, moving toward the door. "I need coffee anyway." After she left, I approached the bed cautiously, as though Montgomery might suddenly sit up and reveal this was all an elaborate trap. He remained motionless, diminished by illness in a way that all my corporate maneuvering had failed to achieve. "Montgomery," I said, not expecting a response. To my surprise, his eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with effort. "Nathaniel," he whispered, his voice a pale shadow of its former authority. "You came. Vanessa said you wanted to see me." A slight nod, the movement clearly painful. "Sit." I lowered myself into the chair Vanessa had vacated, acutely uncomfortable. What was I doing here? What could possibly be said to bridge the chasm between us? "You were right," Montgomery said after a long silence, each word appearing to cost him considerable effort. "About what?" "Everything." His right hand twitched, perhaps attempting to gesture but failing. "I underestimated you. Always did." I studied his face, searching for signs of the manipulative genius I had known. But his eyes held only fatigue and what appeared to be genuine regret. "Why did you do it?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for months finally finding voice. Why try to replace me after everything I had done for Calloway? He closed his eyes briefly, gathering strength. "Ego, control, couldn't stand that you had made the company yours, not mine anymore." The confession, extracted by illness rather than conscience, should have felt satisfying. Instead, it merely underscored the pettiness of our conflict, the waste of energy and emotion. "Julian was never right for Calloway," he continued, his breathing labored. "Knew that, but he was malleable, could control him." "Unlike me," I supplied. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Unlike you." We sat in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the beeping of machines and Montgomery's labored breathing. I had imagined this moment differently, a complete victory, Montgomery groveling for forgiveness, acknowledging my superiority. The reality was far more complex and somehow less satisfying. "What do you want from me, Montgomery?" I asked finally. "Absolution? Forgiveness?" He shook his head slightly. "Too late for that. Want you to learn from my mistakes." "What mistakes would those be? Betraying the people who trusted you? Manipulating your own daughter?" A grimace crossed his face, whether from physical pain or my words I couldn't tell. "The mistake of putting pride before people, power before connection. Says the man who tried to take everything from me," I observed dryly. "And that's why I'm here," he replied, gesturing weakly at the hospital room. "Alone, but for a daughter who stays out of obligation. No friends, no legacy." "You still have your money," I pointed out. "The settlement was generous." "Money?" He almost laughed, the sound turning into a wheezing cough. Cold comfort at the end. I didn't respond, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I hadn't come for philosophy or deathbed wisdom. "Vanessa loves you," he said abruptly, his gaze suddenly sharp despite his weakened state. "Always has. My fault she couldn't show it. Trained her too well. Vanessa made her choices, I replied, though the certainty in my voice had diminished. She stood with you. Because I gave her no choice. Threatened to disown her if she opposed me. His breathing had become more labored, his words punctuated by gasps. My final manipulation. I stared at him, trying to process this revelation. Could it be true? Or was this Montgomery's last attempt to destabilize me, to inject doubt into my carefully constructed certainty? Why tell me this now? I demanded. What do you gain? Nothing, he admitted, his eyes drifting closed. Too late for me, but not for you. A nurse entered, checking monitors with practiced efficiency. He needs to rest, she told me firmly. You can come back later. I nodded, rising from the chair. As I turned to leave, Montgomery's hand moved, fingers stretching toward me in a fragile gesture. Don't become me, he whispered, the words barely audible. Too high a price. In the hallway, I found Vanessa sitting on a bench, a coffee cup cradled in her hands, untouched. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Is it true? I asked without preamble. Did he threaten to disown you if you opposed the plan to replace me? She blinked, clearly surprised by the question. He told you that? Answer me, Vanessa, is it true? She set the coffee cup aside, her hands trembling slightly. Yes, she admitted quietly. He said he would cut me out completely. No inheritance, no connection to the company, nothing, if I didn't support Julian's appointment. And you believed him? You know my father, she said simply. He doesn't make empty threats. I ran a hand through my hair, my mind racing to recalibrate months of assumptions and conclusions. Why didn't you tell me this before, during the divorce proceedings, any time in the last 6 months? Would you have believed me? She asked, her gaze direct. Or would you have seen it as another manipulation, another Callaway tactic? She was right, of course. I wouldn't have believed her. I had been too hurt, too angry, too certain of my own righteousness. You could have warned me, I insisted, given me some indication of what was coming. I tried, she said, frustration edging her tone. Those weeks before the announcement, when I suggested you secure your position through legal means, when I asked you to review your contract, you dismissed it as unnecessary worry. I searched my memory, recalling conversations I had barely registered at the time. Vanessa asking pointed questions about my employment terms, suggesting I consult with an independent attorney, mentioning that her father seemed unusually interested in leadership succession planning. Had I been so blind, so complacent that I missed the warnings she was trying to give? Even if that's true, I said slowly, you still sat there at dinner. You smiled while he announced Julian would be taking over. What choice did I have? She asked, spreading her hands in a helpless gesture. It was already in motion. Opposing him openly would have changed nothing except to make him turn on me as well. You could have chosen me, I said, the words emerging more vulnerable than I intended. Over him, over the Callaway name and fortune. She looked away, her profile silhouetted against the sterile hospital hallway. I wasn't strong enough, she admitted after a long moment. I've never been strong enough to defy him, not until it was too late. We sat in silence, the gulf between us both narrower and wider than it had been. Narrower because I finally understood the impossible position she had been in. Wider because that understanding had come too late to save what we had once shared. What happens now? She asked finally, turning back to me. I don't know, I answered honestly. Everything I've believed for the past year has just been upended. Not everything, she corrected gently. You built something remarkable with Callaway, with Barrett Enterprises now. That's real. That's yours, regardless of anything else. I nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. The company was mine. I had earned it through years of work, vision, and finally, the courage to fight for what was mine. That hadn't changed. I should go, I said, rising from the bench. I have a board meeting this afternoon. She looked up at me, her expression carefully neutral. Will you come back? To see him, I mean? I hesitated, genuinely uncertain. I don't know. I need time to process all this. I understand. She smiled sadly. For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've accomplished, what you've become, even if I'm no longer part of it. As I walked toward the elevator, her words echoed in my mind. What had I become? The victorious corporate warrior reshaping an empire in my image, or something else, something caught between triumph and isolation, power and emptiness? Montgomery's warning, now revealed as his final attempt at redemption rather than manipulation, followed me out of the hospital. Don't become me. Too high a price. The sun was setting as I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, the city spreading before me like a tapestry of light and shadow. In the 6 months since Montgomery's stroke and subsequent death, Barrett Enterprises had continued its meteoric rise, expanding into new markets, breaking revenue records, accumulating accolades from the business press. I had achieved everything I had set out to do, punished those who betrayed me, claimed the company that was rightfully mine, established a legacy entirely separate from the Callaway name. By every external measure, I had won completely, and yet, Montgomery's warning had proven more prophetic than I cared to admit. The higher I climbed, the more isolated I became. Executives feared me rather than respected me. Board members deferred to my judgment without genuine engagement. I had created an echo chamber where my voice was the only one that mattered, precisely the environment that had led to Montgomery's downfall. I sipped my whiskey, contemplating the irony. In defeating my enemy, I had begun to transform into him. My phone buzzed with a message. Vanessa, annual charity gala tonight, Montgomery Memorial Foundation. Thought you might want to know. I stared at the text, surprised by the unexpected contact. We had spoken only a handful of times since her father's funeral. Brief, civil exchanges regarding final legal matters. The foundation had been established with part of Montgomery's estate, dedicated to stroke research and treatment. A fitting legacy for a man whose life had been cut short by the very condition his money now helped combat. I typed a response. Thank you for letting me know. Her reply came almost immediately. Would you consider attending as my guest? The invitation caught me off guard. We had maintained a careful distance since the divorce, both professionally and personally. To appear together at a public event would generate speculation, questions I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. And yet, the lessons of the past year had been hard-earned, but valuable. Pride had nearly destroyed Montgomery. Vengeance had nearly consumed me. Perhaps it was time for something different. Not reconciliation exactly, but a step away from the isolation I had embraced. What time? I texted back. 8 p.m., Meridian Plaza Hotel. I glanced at my watch. Just enough time to shower and change. I'll be there. As I set my phone down, I gazed once more at the city below. My city in many ways. The empire I had built would continue to grow, to evolve, to shape markets and influence lives. But perhaps it didn't have to be at the expense of my own humanity. Montgomery's final words had been a warning, but also a gift if I was wise enough to accept it. Don't become me. Too high a price. I turned from the balcony, decision made. The future stretched before me, full of possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider. Barrett Enterprises would remain my legacy, the physical manifestation of my vision and determination. But perhaps there was room for something else as well. Connections, trust, even forgiveness. Not tonight, perhaps. Maybe not for months or years, but someday. The elevator doors closed behind me as I descended toward the waiting car, toward Vanessa, toward whatever came next.